At 38, after a divorce that took the house, the car, and every dollar in the savings account, Claire Jackson had two things left: a 9-year-old daughter, and a cardboard box from her father's room at the VA hospital. Thomas Jackson had died the way he'd lived, quietly, without anything to show, for 71 years on Earth, or so everyone thought. Because when Claire opened his Bible, the one he'd read to her from when she was small, something fell from the binding. A deed. 47 acres in a county she'd never heard of, purchased for $2,200. And what she found on that land was something no one could have imagined. The apartment smelled like detergent. It always did. Claire lived above a laundromat on Lansing Avenue in a studio with a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower stall, and a pull-out couch where Lily slept on weekends. The building vibrated when the commercial washers hit their spin cycle, which was most of the day and half the night. She kept a list on the refrigerator, 2 columns written in marker on the back of an old menu from Maples. One side said, "Pay now," and the other said, "Pay when you can." The second column was always longer. It had been longer since the divorce was finalized 8 months ago. Claire worked mornings at Maples, a diner on Route 9 with vinyl booths, and a kitchen window where the cook, a man everyone called Hector, slid plates and barked order numbers. She poured coffee, refilled ketchup, bussed tables, and on a good day, walked out with $40 in tips. On a bad day, it was closer to 20. Nights. She drove to a fulfillment center 20 minutes east and packed boxes until 2 o'clock in the morning. She got home at 2:30, set her alarm for 6 o'clock, and did it again. On weekends, she had Lily. Kevin had her the other 5 days. That was the arrangement the judge approved, and Claire's lawyer, whom she'd found 3 days before the first hearing, hadn't pushed for more. Weekends meant Saturday morning pickup at Kevin's house and Sunday evening drop-off. It meant 48 hours where Claire could pretend her life still had a shape to it. She didn't talk about the divorce much, not to Ruth at the diner, not to the women at the fulfillment center who had their own problems. There was nothing to say that would change the numbers on the fridge. Thomas Jackson died on the Tuesday in March. The call came at 6 o'clock in the morning. A nurse at the VA hospital told Claire that her father had passed in his sleep during the night. No distress, no pain. She said it gently, the way someone does when they've made this call before. Claire thanked her and hung up and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, staring at the water stain on the ceiling above the shower. She didn't cry. She wasn't sure what she felt. Something heavy sat behind her ribs, but it didn't have a name yet. The funeral was Thursday. 5 people came. Claire, Lily, a neighbor from Thomas's apartment building named Mrs. Cruz, who brought a casserole dish covered in foil, the pastor from a church Thomas attended a few times a year, and a man from the VFW Post who introduced himself and said Thomas had been a member for decades. "Quiet fellow," the man said. Always the first one to help set up chairs for an event. Never stayed for the event itself. The service lasted 20 minutes. The pastor called Thomas a man of few words, a man who served his country, and then served his community without fanfare. Claire stood holding Lily's hand, and listened, and thought that this was probably the kindest possible summary of her father's life. It was also the shortest. After the service, Mrs. Cruz handed Claire the casserole. "Your father fixed my garbage disposal last year," she said. "I offered to pay him and he said no. He just knocked on my door one Saturday morning with a wrench, and said he'd noticed it was making a noise through the wall." Claire thanked her. She put the casserole in the car and drove home. She ate half of it standing at the kitchen counter, and put the rest in the fridge. Thomas had been a groundskeeper for the county parks department. That was his career. 32 years of mowing, trimming hedges, repairing irrigation lines, and painting benches. He retired with a small pension, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment, and drove a truck older than his daughter. He didn't travel. He didn't go to restaurants. On weekends, he said he went fishing, and nobody, including Claire, had ever asked where. When Claire's mother left, Claire was 11. She remembered standing at the kitchen window and watching her mother's car pull out of the driveway and Thomas standing behind her with his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't chase the car. He didn't call after her or break down or throw a glass against the wall. He just stood there until the car turned the corner, and then he went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Spaghetti. She remembered that he made spaghetti and they ate in silence and he did the dishes and the next morning he went to work. Claire had loved her father. She had also spent most of her adult life quietly frustrated with him. She was frustrated with what he hadn't done, not what he had. He hadn't fought for her mother. He hadn't pushed for anything better. He hadn't asked hard questions about Kevin when asking them might have mattered. He existed quietly for 71 years, and now he'd stopped, and the sum total of his estate was a box of belongings that fit on the passenger seat. 3 days after the funeral, Claire drove to the VA to collect his things. A nurse with kind eyes and a lanyard badge that read Patrice handed her a cardboard box and said Thomas had been well liked on the ward. He fixed the cabinet in the break room, she said. Nobody asked him to. He just showed up one morning with a screwdriver and had it done by lunch. Claire looked at the box. That sounds like him. He talked about you, Patrice said. Claire looked up. He did? He kept a picture of you and your daughter on his nightstand. He told me once that you were stronger than you knew. Patrice smiled. He was proud of you. Claire didn't know what to say to that. She thanked the nurse and carried the box to the car and sat behind the wheel for a few minutes before starting the engine. That night after her shift at the fulfillment center, she sat on the floor of the apartment with the box between her knees. 2 o'clock in the morning. The laundromat below was silent for once. She pulled out Thomas's reading glasses, wire frames, one arm held on with electrical tape. She set them on the carpet beside her. His flannel shirt came next. Green and brown plaid, soft from years of washing. She held it to her face and breathed in. It smelled like grass and soap and something faintly sweet she'd always associated with him but could never name. She folded the shirt and set it on the counter. The pocket watch was heavy in her palm. Brass old, the back engraved with his initials and the word Semper Fi. The crystal was cracked and the hands had stopped at 417. Then she picked up the Bible. It was old brown leather cracked along the spine, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle. She slipped the rubber band off and opened it. The pages were tissue-thin, some dog-eared, some marked with pencil. Thomas had underlined passages and written small notes in the margins. Claire recognized his handwriting, the same careful print she'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists her whole life. She ran her thumb along the spine. It felt wrong, too thick for leather and paper. She pressed the binding between her fingers. There was a ridge underneath, something flat and stiff, tucked between the layers. Claire turned the Bible over and studied the back cover. The inner edge of the binding had been opened in resin. The new thread was a slightly different shade than the original. This was deliberate work. Someone had cut the binding open, placed something inside and stitched it closed. She went to the kitchen drawer and came back with scissors. She cut the stitching slowly, one thread at a time, easing the leather apart. The flap separated. Inside, pressed flat, folded twice, was a single piece of paper. Claire pulled it out, unfolded it, held it under the lamp on the floor beside her. A property deed filed with the Coulter County Recorder's Office. Property of Thomas James Jackson. 47 acres. Parcel number and legal description filling the middle of the page. Recorded October 14, 1989. Purchase price $2,200. She read it twice. She turned it over. The back was blank. She looked at the Bible sitting open on the carpet, and then at the deed in her hands, and felt the floor shift beneath everything she thought she knew about her father. Thomas Jackson, the groundskeeper, the man who drove a truck held together with duct tape. The man who ate canned soup for dinner 3 nights a week and never complained about anything. He had owned 47 acres of land for 35 years, and he had told nobody. Claire didn't sleep. At 5 in the morning, she sat at the kitchen counter with her laptop and searched the Holmes County Assessor's website. The parcel was listed. Thomas J. Jackson owner. Taxes paid through the previous year from a P.O. box in a town called Walnut Creek. The assessed value was low, rural, unincorporated, no municipal water or sewer. But there was a note in the record. Improvements on parcel. She called the county assessor's office when it opened at 8. Yes, that parcel's active. The woman on the phone said taxes are current. No liens, no encumbrances. Can you tell me if there are structures on it? The assessment shows improvements, but I don't have details on what kind. You'd have to go see it yourself. Claire thanked her and hung up. She sat with her coffee going cold. Lily was at Kevin's until Saturday. She had a diner shift in 40 minutes and a fulfillment shift tonight. She went to work. She poured coffee and ran plates and smiled, and folded the deed into her apron pocket where she could feel its edge against her hip all morning. That night at the fulfillment center, she packed boxes and thought about 47 acres. When she got home at 2:30, she set her alarm for 6 and went to bed. On Thursday, she called in sick to the fulfillment center for the first time in 8 months. She didn't feel guilty. She felt awake. Saturday morning, she picked Lily up at Kevin's at 9 o'clock. Lily was on the porch with her library book, a thick one about a girl detective. She climbed into the back seat and buckled her belt. "Where are we going?" Lily asked. "South. I need to see something your grandpa left." Lily looked up from her book. "Like a present?" "I don't know yet." They drove south on the highway for an hour and a half, then exited onto a 2-lane state road. The strip malls disappeared. Gas stations thinned out. The land opened into fields, fences, barns set far back from the road. "It's pretty out here," Lily said. Her face was against the window. "It is. Did Grandpa live out here?" "I don't think so, but he owns some land. I just found out about it." Lily considered this. Why didn't he tell anyone? Claire glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. That is a very good question. The GPS directed them onto a county road that hadn't been repaved in years. The pavement cracked and narrowed. Trees pressed close. Half a mile later, Claire saw it. A gap in the fence line on the right side of the road. A metal gate, rusted but standing, held closed by a simple latch. No padlock, no mailbox, no name. She pulled onto the shoulder and turned off the engine. "Is this it?" Lily asked. "I think so." They sat there for a moment. Claire looked at the gate and the trees beyond it, and the dirt track disappearing into the shade. "Okay," she said. She got out and pushed the gate open and drove through. The track curved between old oaks. The canopy was dense enough to dim the midday sun to something green and quiet. Gravel popped under the tires. Lily had her face against the window again. A fourth of a mile in, the trees opened up. Claire stopped the car. A house stood in a clearing. Small, single-story, wood-sided with a covered porch across the front. The roof was metal, gone green in patches. To the right sat a larger structure, a workshop or barn with wide double doors. Behind both, stretching back toward low hills, rows of trees stood in careful straight lines. Dozens and dozens of them spaced evenly, planted with purpose. Closer to the house, a garden with raised beds and wood frames, overgrown but clearly planned. Trellises, the remains of a chicken coop, 3 beehives on a low platform at the edge of the orchard. Everything was still. No other house in sight. No traffic, just the wind in the trees and the ticking of the car as it cooled. Claire opened her door and stepped out. The air smelled like grass and turned soil into something sweet. Apple blossoms. Lily stood beside her. Her eyes moved from the house to the orchard to the workshop and back. "Mama," she whispered, "did Grandpa build all this?" "I don't know," Claire said. But she thought of Thomas's hands, the calluses she remembered from childhood, and the way he could fix anything. And she was starting to think she did know. Something moved at the treeline. A dog stepped out from between the first row of apple trees. Medium-sized, brown and white border collie markings. Alert ears, steady eyes. She stood about 40 feet away and watched them without making a sound. Her head was slightly tilted. "Look," Lily said, "a dog. I see her. Stay close to me." They walked toward the house. The porch steps were solid under Claire's weight. No creak, no give. The railing was smooth, sanded by hand, and sealed with something that still held. She ran her fingers along the top rail and felt the care in it. This wasn't hasty work. This was someone who measured twice and sanded 3 times. The front door was unlocked. She turned the knob and pushed. Inside, the air was cool and still. A thin coat of dust covered every surface, but the dust sat on order. The main room had a wood stove against one wall, an armchair, and floor-to-ceiling shelves built into the walls. The shelves were empty, waiting. The kitchen was small. Cast iron sink. A 2-burner propane stove. A counter made from a single wide plank of wood sanded and sealed until it shined, even under the dust. A bedroom through a doorway on the left. A bed frame made from the same wood as the shelves. A mattress still in its factory plastic. A nightstand with a single drawer. The window faced the orchard. Everything in the house was handmade. Claire could see it in the joints, in the slight imperfections at the corners where hand tools had done the work of machines. This was not a contractor's build. This was one person with saws and planes and sandpaper and years. Maybe 700 square foot total. A place for one or for two people who didn't need much. A place built slowly piece by someone who cared more about getting it right than getting it done. Then she saw the table in the kitchen, square, made from the same wood as the counter. One chair pushed in. And on the table, centered carefully, a white envelope. Her name was written on the front in pencil. Thomas's handwriting, small, precise, slanting to the right. She'd have known it anywhere. Claire picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy. She could feel something inside, something solid and metallic. A key. Lily stood in the doorway. She was looking at the shelves, at the wood stove, at the light coming through the window. "Mama, what is it?" Claire looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the envelope in her hands. Her father's handwriting, her name, in a house she had never known existed. On a farm nobody had ever mentioned. 2 hours from the apartment where she packed boxes at night and poured coffee in the morning and pretended everything was fine. She slid her thumb under the sealed flap. The flap tore along the fold. Inside was a single sheet of paper wrapped around a brass key. Claire unfolded the paper. Thomas's handwriting, the same small careful print. She read it standing at the kitchen table, while Lily watched from the doorway. "Claire, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you found what I hid. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I tried to start that conversation 100 times and never got past the first sentence. This property is yours. Everything I built here is for you and for Lily. The key opens the workshop. Start there. There are other letters around the place. You'll find them when you're ready. I numbered them so you'd know the order. This one doesn't have a number because it's not part of the set. It's just me saying, I'm sorry, I was the kind of father who built things instead of saying things. I hope what I built is enough. Dad." Claire read it twice. She folded it and put it in her back pocket and looked at the key in her palm. Brass, solid with a round head and a simple cut. She looked at Lily. "What did it say?" Lily asked. "It said the key opens the workshop. Can we go see?" "Yeah, let's go see." They walked off the porch and across the yard toward the workshop. The dog was still at the edge of the orchard watching. She had moved closer while they were inside, maybe 30 feet away now. Lily waved at her. She didn't move, but her tail shifted once. The workshop doors had a padlock. Claire tried the key and it turned on the first attempt. She pulled the lock free, unlatched the doors, and swung them open. The light poured in. The workshop was larger than the house, 30 feet deep, maybe 20 wide. A workbench ran the length of the back wall with tools hanging above it on pegboard. Hand saws, planes, chisels, clamps, levels, squares, everything organized, everything clean under the dust. But the tools were not what stopped Claire in the doorway. The floor of the workshop was filled with furniture, tables, chairs, a bookshelf, tall and wide, with adjustable shelves, a rocking chair, small child-sized, a nightstand, a dresser with 6 drawers, a long dining table with clean lines and tapered legs, 2 benches to match. Every piece was finished, sanded, smooth, stained, sealed, and every piece had a strip of masking tape on it with Thomas's handwriting. Claire walked in slowly. She touched the dining table. The tape read for Claire's kitchen. She moved to the bookshelf for Lily's room. The small rocking chair for Lily's room. The small rocking chair for Lily. The dresser for Claire's bedroom. One of the benches. Porch bench seats too. There were more. A side table by the front window. A set of wooden coat hooks mounted on a board. Front door inside. A cutting board thick and heavy. Kitchen by the stove. Claire stood in the middle of the workshop, surrounded by furniture her father had built for rooms in a house she didn't know existed, for a life he'd imagined for her years before she needed it. Lily had followed her in. She found the rocking chair and ran her hand along the arm. "This one says my name," she said. "I know. Grandpa made this." "He did." Lily sat down in it. The chair rocked smoothly. She looked up at Claire with an expression that was half wonder and half something else. Something careful. He must have been working on all of this for a really long time, she said. Claire couldn't answer that. She just nodded and kept her hand on the dining table and breathed. Outside, gravel crunched. An engine. Claire stepped to the workshop door and saw an old blue pickup pulling up the dirt track. The dog had moved to the far side of the yard and was sitting upright, alert but not alarmed. The truck stopped and an older man got out. Tall, thin, white hair under a cap that said Home's Feed and Seed. He wore a work shirt and boots and moved with the careful steadiness of someone whose body had been strong for a long time and was now negotiating with age. He saw Claire and stopped, took off his cap, looked at her for a long moment. "Help you," he said. "I'm Claire Jackson, Thomas's daughter." The man's face changed. Not surprise exactly. More like a question he'd been carrying for years had just been answered. "Thomas's girl," he said quietly. He put his cap back on. "I'm Michael. I live up the road about quarter-mile. Been watching the place since Thomas stopped coming." "You knew him?" 30 years of Saturday morning coffee." "Yes, I did." Claire stepped off the porch. "He came here every weekend. Every weekend I can remember. He'd pull in Friday night or early Saturday morning. We'd have coffee on my porch around 8 o'clock. Then he'd work all day Saturday, most of Sunday, whatever it was that week, planting, building, repairing. He'd drive home Sunday evening, never miss for 30 years, give or take. I moved on to my place in 1990. Thomas was already here. The house was half built. The first trees were in the ground, maybe 10 or 12 of them. He'd been at it for about a year by then. Lily came out of the workshop. She stood next to Claire. "This your girl?" Michael said. "This is Lily." Michael nodded at her. "You look like your grandpa round the eyes." Lily studied him. "Did you know my grandpa?" "I did. He was a good man. Quiet but good." "Everyone keeps saying he was quiet," Lily said. Michael smiled. It was a small smile. Private, like he was remembering something. "Well, he was. But quiet doesn't mean empty. Your grandpa said more with a fence post and a hammer than most people say in a year." Claire looked at the orchard. The rows of trees stretched back into the afternoon light. "Can you show me around?" "I'd be glad to." They walked the property together. Michael knew it well. He'd watched Thomas build it piece by piece across 3 decades, and he narrated the tour the way you'd narrate the history of a place that mattered to you. "The orchard first, 84 trees," Michael said. "Thomas planted 3 or 4 a year. The earliest ones were tall now, their trunks thick." Michael pointed out the varieties: wine saps along the south row, Arkansas blacks on the west side, Rome Beauty in the center. A few that Thomas had grafted himself, combining rootstock from one variety with fruiting wood from another. "He learned grafting from a book," Michael said. "Checked it out from the library. Practiced on scrap wood first. First few grafts didn't take, but he kept at it." "He never mentioned any of this to me," Claire said. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked at the trees. Thomas didn't mention much of anything to anyone. That was his way. I learned early on not to ask him personal questions. He'd answer if he wanted to. Mostly he didn't. The beehives were next. 3 colonies on a low platform near the orchard's eastern edge. Michael had been tending them since Thomas went into the VA. "I'm no beekeeper," he said. "I do my best. Check the frames. Make sure they've got feed if they need it." Thomas could sit next to a hive and the bees wouldn't bother him. He just talked to them quiet like he was telling them something private. "Thomas talked to the bees," Claire said. "Thomas talked to everything except people." Behind the workshop, a path led down a gentle slope to a stone-lined opening built into the hillside, the root cellar. Michael pulled open the wooden door, and they stepped inside. It was cool and dark and smelled like earth and vinegar. Shelves lined both walls floor to ceiling. Mason jars filled every shelf. Apple butter, peach preserves, pickled green beans, canned tomatoes, blackberry jam, strawberry jelly, dried herbs, and paper bags labeled in Thomas's handwriting. Rosemary, thyme, sage, mullein, chamomile. He spent September and October putting things up. Michael said he'd bring me a jar of apple butter every Christmas. Best I ever had. Lily picked up a jar of peach preserves and held it to the light. The glass was dusty, but the contents were golden. "Can we eat these?" she asked. "They're sealed right," Michael said. Should be fine. Claire looked at the shelves. Rows and rows of food preserved and labeled and stored. A man making sure there would be enough. A man stocking a kitchen for someone. Michael led them to the spring last. Behind the property, past the orchard, a narrow trail through a stand of birch trees ended at a rock face where water seeped from a crack and collected in a shallow basin before running off downhill. Clean water, Michael said. Thomas had it tested every couple of years. Never failed. He ran a gravity line from here to the house. Simple setup, but it works. They stood by the spring for a minute. Claire could hear the water trickling over rock. Michael, she said. Did he ever tell you who he was building this for? Michael was quiet for a moment. He took off his cap and ran his hand through his hair, and put the cap back on. He told me once, he said. We were sitting on my porch. This was maybe 10 years ago. He just finished the bedroom in the house, and he was tired, but he looked, I don't know, satisfied. And he said, I'm building something for someone who doesn't know she needs it yet. That's all he said. I didn't ask who. Figured he'd tell me when he was ready. He looked at Claire. I guess he told you instead. Claire didn't say anything. She looked at the spring and the birch trees and the orchard beyond, and tried to put together the father she'd known with the man who had done all of this. They walked back to the workshop. Michael said he'd better get home to feed his own animals, but he wrote his phone number on a scrap of paper and handed it to Claire. Anything you need, he said. I'm right up the road. Thank you. He tipped his cap at Lily. Nice to meet you, young lady. Nice to meet you too, Lily said. They watched his truck rumble back down the dirt track. When it was gone, Claire went back into the workshop. The dog had moved again, closer now, sitting about 20 feet from the open doors. She watched Claire go inside but didn't follow. She ran her hands along the workbench, pulled open drawers. One had a collection of hardware, nails, and screws sorted into coffee cans. Another had sandpaper and different grits stacked neatly. The third drawer she opened had something different. An envelope, small white, the number 2 written on the front in Thomas's handwriting. Claire picked it up and sat down on the workshop floor with her back against the workbench. She opened it. Claire, if you found this one, you've been going through the drawers, which means you're curious, which means you're starting to understand what this place is. Good. This drawer has the important stuff. The wood planes need oil twice a year. Use the linseed oil in the can under the bench, not the tung oil. Tung is for finishing. The chisels are sharp. Don't use them without the gloves in the top drawer. The handsaw on the right side of the board is the good one. The other one pulls left. I keep meaning to fix it. Probably won't. Now the part one really wanted to say. You were the strongest person I knew. Even when you were 8 years old and refused to cry when your mother left. You stood at that window and you didn't make a sound. I wanted to tell you it was okay to cry. I tried. The words wouldn't come out. They never did, the important ones. I'm sorry for that. I spent my whole life not being able to say what I meant to say to the people I wanted to say it to. So I built things instead. I hope you'll understand someday that they were all the same thing. The words in the wood, they were all the same thing. Dad. Claire sat on the workshop floor and read the letter twice. Outside, Lily was crouching near the dog. She was holding her hand out, palm up, and talking to him in a low voice. The dog was sitting very still, his nose twitching, considering. Claire folded the letter and put it in her pocket with the first one. She looked at the furniture around her, the dining table, the bookshelf, the child's rocking chair. She looked at the masking tape labels. Each one in Thomas's careful handwriting. Each one addressed to a room in a house he built for a daughter, who didn't know he was building it. She pressed her hands against the floor and felt the smooth concrete Thomas had poured, and she let out a long breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They left at 4. Lily fell asleep in the back seat before they reached the highway. Claire drove in silence. The sun was low and the fields along the county road were turning gold. She didn't turn on the radio. She didn't want noise. She wanted to sit with what she'd seen and what she'd read and what Michael had told her. 30 years, every weekend coffee with Michael at 8 in the morning. Work until dark, drive home, do it again. She thought about all the Saturdays she'd assumed her father was fishing. All the Sundays she'd called and he'd said he was just getting back a little tired. She'd thought he meant tired from sitting on a riverbank with a rod. He meant tired from building a house, from planting an orchard, from carrying lumber and pouring concrete and grafting apple trees from a technique he taught himself out of a library book. Back at the apartment, she carried Lily inside and put her on the pull-out couch. She covered her with a blanket and stood there looking at her daughter's face. Then she went to the kitchen counter and took out both letters and laid them flat. She read them again. She looked at the key still in her pocket. She put it on the counter between the letters. She didn't sleep that night either. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about who Thomas really was. The man she'd resented for his silence had been building a farm for her in that silence. Every weekend she thought he was doing nothing. He was doing the biggest thing anyone had ever done for her. And he never said a word. The next Saturday, Claire was up before dawn. She packed the car while the light was still gray. Work gloves she bought at the dollar store. Old jeans and a flannel shirt. A bucket sponges cleaning spray. Garbage bags. A cooler with sandwiches and juice boxes. She picked Lily up at 9 o'clock. This time, Lily was already waiting on the porch with a backpack, not just her library book, a change of clothes, her rain boots, and a granola bar she packed herself. "Are we going to the farm?" she asked before Claire's car had fully stopped. "We're going to the farm?" Lily grinned and climbed in and buckled her belt and opened her backpack to check her supplies. One more time. Claire pulled out of Kevin's driveway and turned south. She was not visiting this time. She was starting. They pulled through the gate at 11 o'clock and the dog was waiting in the yard. She stood near the porch steps with her ears forward and her tail low. Not wagging but not tucked either. When Claire got out, she took 2 steps toward her and stopped. Lily crouched down and held out her hand. "Hey girl." The dog looked at her. She looked at Claire. Then she sat down right where she was and waited. "She's thinking about it," Lily said. "Give her time." They spent that first working Saturday cleaning the house. Claire swept every room, wiped down the shelves, scrubbed the kitchen counter and the sink. Lily carried the rocking chair in from the workshop and placed it by the window in the main room. Together, they wrestled the dining table through the front door. Thomas's masking tape label still on it and set it in the kitchen. Claire ran her hand across the surface. Smooth, solid, real. Michael came by around 3 o'clock with a jar of honey from the hives. "Figured you'd want to try it," he said. He looked at the table in the kitchen and the rocking chair by the window and nodded once, starting to look like a home. By the second weekend, they had a routine. Arrive at 11, coffee on the porch with whatever Claire brought in a thermos, walk the orchard, check the beehives from a distance, work until 4, drive home. Michael stopped by most Saturdays. He'd sit on the porch while Claire painted or repaired something, and he'd talk about the property the way someone talks about a place they've watched grow up. He told her which fence post Thomas had set first. He showed her the stone path to the root cellar that Thomas had laid one summer, carrying each flat rock from a creek bed a half-mile away. He pointed out the mark Thomas had carved into the door frame of the workshop, a small T with the date, 1991. What was he like? Claire asked one Saturday. They were sitting on the porch. Lily was in the orchard trying to get the dog to follow her. She was following, but at a distance of about 15 feet, which was progress. Michael thought about it. Steady. He was the steadiest man I ever knew. Never rushed anything. If a board wasn't right, he'd pull it and start over. If a tree didn't take, he'd plant another one in its place and water it every week until it did. I never saw him angry. I never saw him quit on anything. Did he ever talk about me? Not by name, but he'd mention a daughter sometimes. He'd say things like, "My girl's smart, smarter than me." Or he'd come back from one of your visits and he'd be quiet, quieter than usual, and I'd know it hadn't gone well, but I didn't ask. Claire looked at her hands. I wasn't very good to him at the end. I was so caught up in my own mess that I barely visited. He understood, Michael said. He always understood more than he let on. The third Saturday, Claire brought the bookshelf into the house. Lily helped. They set it against the wall in the bedroom, and Lily announced that this was now her room, at least on weekends, and began organizing it with items from her backpack, a notebook, 2 colored pencils, a small flashlight, and a pine cone she'd picked up from the orchard. The dog had gotten closer. She now sat on the porch steps while they worked inside. And when Lily came out, He'd stand and his tail would move in small, cautious arcs. She still wouldn't let anyone touch her. But she was there. Every Saturday when they pulled through the gate, she was there. It was the 5th weekend when Claire found the letter. She was in the root cellar rotating jars the way Michael had showed her. Oldest in front, newest in back. She moved a row of canned tomatoes on the bottom shelf and saw the envelope tucked against the wall behind the jars, with the number 3 on the front. She wiped the dust off and opened it, standing in the cool, dark of the cellar with the jar of tomatoes still in her other hand. Claire, if you've made it to the root cellar, you're taking this seriously. Good. The preserves on the top shelf are the oldest. Start with those. The peach preserves from 2 summers ago are the best I've ever put up. Eat them on toast. You'll see what I mean. Now, the part you won't want to hear. I know about Kevin. I've known for a while. I saw it at Lily's birthday 3 years ago. He corrected you in front of his mother. You went quiet after. I recognized it because I saw the same look in your mother's eyes before she left, except she was the one doing it, and I was the one going quiet. I should have said something to you. I know that. But you wouldn't have listened. You were still trying to make it work. And if I had pushed, it would have driven you further from me, not closer. So I kept quiet and I kept building. It's all I know how to do. I'm sorry, Claire. I should have been braver, but I want you to know that I saw you. I always saw you, Dad. Claire read the letter twice. She sat down on the stone step of the root cellar with the door open and the afternoon light falling across her knees, and she read it a 3rd time. He knew. He knew about Kevin. He'd known for years. She felt anger first at Thomas for seeing it and saying nothing, for being right there, close enough to say one word. One single word and choosing silence instead. And then anger at herself because he was right. She wouldn't have listened. 3 years ago, she was still defending Kevin at dinner tables, still explaining away the comments, still telling herself it was just stress from his work. If Thomas had said something, she would have pushed him away. She knew that. And then something else moved through her. Not anger, something lower and slower and harder to name. The weight of knowing that the quietest person in her life had been paying the most attention. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket with the others. She climbed out of the root cellar and walked to the porch and sat down. Lily was at the edge of the orchard with the dog. She was close, maybe 5 feet away. Lily was sitting cross-legged in the grass, not reaching for her, just sitting. The dog was lying down. Claire watched them and thought about Thomas watching her at Lily's birthday party, seeing everything, saying nothing. Driving back to this farm the next weekend and picking up a hammer and going to work. She told Ruth the next Monday at the diner. It was early before the breakfast rush. Claire was refilling salt shakers and Ruth was behind the counter doing the morning paperwork. My father left me a farm, Claire said. Ruth looked up. A farm? 47 acres. He built a house on it and an orchard. He's been doing it for 30 years and he never told anyone. Ruth set her pen down. Claire had never talked about her father much at work. I remember mentioning him. You said he was a groundskeeper, that he didn't talk much. He didn't. He built a farm instead. Ruth was quiet for a moment. She was a woman who didn't fill silence with noise, which was one of the things Claire liked about her. The quietest people build the loudest things, Ruth said. My father was the same way. Never told you what he was thinking. Just showed up one day with the addition on the back of the house built, and expected everyone to figure out what it meant. She looked at Claire. Is it a good farm? It's a beautiful farm. Then go be on it. Claire smiled. It's complicated. The custody arrangement, my jobs, everything good is complicated. Doesn't mean it isn't good. The 6th weekend, Lily named the dog. They were sitting on the porch after lunch. Claire was sanding the arm of a chair that had roughened over the winter. Lily was reading her library book. The dog was on the porch with them for the first time, not on the lap, not being petted, just lying near the top step about 3 feet from Lily's chair, her chin on her paws. Lily put her book down. I want to call her Lady, she said. Claire looked at the dog. She raised her eyes when Lily spoke, but didn't lift her head. Lady, Claire said like she's scouting the farm, making sure everything's okay. That's what she does, right? She checks on things. She does. Lady, Lily said again, this time to the dog directly. She looked at her. Her tail moved once against the porch boards. I think she likes it, Lily said. After that, the dog was Lady. She started following them closer. By the 7th weekend, she let Lily scratch behind her ears. By the 8th, she was sleeping at Claire's feet while she worked on the porch. One ear always cocked toward the orchard. Claire found letter number 4 taped to the underside of the nightstand drawer in the bedroom. It was shorter than the others. Instructions on how to light the wood stove, what kind of wood burned cleanest, where Thomas had stacked a cord of seasoned oak behind the workshop. And at the end, the bedroom window faces east. I built it that way on purpose. The first light hits the orchard. I wanted you to see the trees every morning. She repaired the porch railing. She weeded the garden beds and planted tomatoes and peppers and green beans with seeds from packets she found in the workshop. Michael brought her starter plants for herbs. She oiled the front door hinges. She cleaned the wood stove and checked the flue. She swept the stone path to the root cellar and pulled weeds from between the cracks. The farm was not the same place she'd first walked into 2 months ago. The dust was gone. Furniture filled the rooms. The garden was planted. Lady was on the porch. Lily's pine cone collection had taken over the windowsill in the bedroom. But Claire still drove back to the apartment every Sunday. She still worked at Maples on Monday through Friday. She still packed boxes at the fulfillment center at night. The farm was a weekend life. The apartment was the rest of it. Kevin noticed it started with the custody exchanges. Claire was different. She knew she was different. She stood straighter. She spoke more clearly. She didn't flinch when Kevin's tone shifted. Something had changed in her posture, in the set of her shoulders. And Kevin saw it the way he always saw things, as information to be managed. You seem good, he said. One Sunday when she dropped Lily off. It wasn't a compliment. It was an inventory. I am good. Lily says you've been going somewhere on Saturdays, a farm. Claire kept her face still. My father left some property. I've been taking care of it. Thomas left property. Kevin's voice was flat. I didn't know Thomas had property. Neither did I. Kevin leaned against the door frame. He had a way of leaning that made it look casual, but wasn't. Where is it? South. South. Where? It doesn't concern the custody arrangement, Kevin. Something flickered in his eyes. He wasn't used to Claire drawing lines. For 11 years she hadn't. She'd given ground every time he pressed. Small concessions that added up to a life where he stood at the center and she stood at the edges. If it's property, he said, it concerns the settlement. My father bought it in 1989. It was never part of our marriage and it's not part of our settlement. Kevin looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a professional smile, the one he used with clients when he was about to explain why the other offer was actually better for them. We should probably talk about this, he said. There's nothing to talk about. She got in her car and drove home. Her hands were shaking on the wheel, not from fear, from something else, from the effort of holding a line she'd never held before. The next Saturday, she pulled through the gate and saw Lady waiting on the porch. Lily ran to her and she stood and pressed against her leg and she laughed and rubbed her ears with both hands. Claire unloaded the car, work gloves, paint for the shutters, a new thermos, sandwiches. Michael came by at noon. They sat on the porch and drank coffee. Claire told him about Kevin's questions. He'll come out here eventually, Michael said. I know you ready for that. Claire looked at the orchard. The trees were full and green. I don't know, but this is my land. Thomas left it to me. Then it's yours and nobody else's, Michael said. They worked through the afternoon. Claire painted the shutters a dark green. Lily helped with the lower ones, standing on a step stool that Michael brought from his truck. Lady lay in the shade of the porch and watched them work. Around 4 o'clock, Claire was on a ladder finishing the last shutter when she heard a car on the gravel. Not Michael's truck. A different engine, smoother, quieter. She looked down the dirt track. A silver sedan was coming up through the oaks. Claire recognized it before it cleared the tree line. She'd ridden in that car for years. She'd left most of her belongings in the trunk of that car the day she moved out. Lily saw it too. She set down her paintbrush. Mama, she said. That's Dad's car. Claire climbed down the ladder. She wiped paint from her hands onto her jeans. Lady stood up on the porch, her ears forward, her body still. Kevin's car came out of the trees and pulled to a stop in the yard. Kevin got out of the car and stood in the yard and looked at the property. He didn't look at Claire first. He looked at the house, the workshop, the orchard, the garden. He put his hands in his pockets and turned slowly, taking it in the way he took in every house he'd ever assessed. Square footage, lot size, condition, comps. This is what Thomas left, he said. This is what Thomas built, Claire said. Kevin walked toward the house. He stepped onto the porch and looked at the railing, the boards, the front door. He ran his hand along the porch post. Then he turned and looked out at the orchard. How many acres? 47. Who's been maintaining it? The neighbor and me? Kevin nodded slowly. Claire watched him process. She knew this expression. Kevin was calculating, measuring the distance between what he was looking at and what he could do with the information. Lily was sitting on the porch steps with Lady beside her. Claire looked at her. Lily, honey, why don't you take Lady to the orchard for a bit? Lily looked from Claire to Kevin and back. She was 9 years old and she understood more than anyone gave her credit for. She stood up and said, "Come on, Lady." The dog followed her across the yard toward the trees. Kevin watched them go. She named the dog. Yes, she did, Claire said. Kevin turned to face her. His voice was the one he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, patient, like a parent explaining something to a child. You should have disclosed this in the settlement. There was nothing to disclose. I didn't know about it. You didn't know your father owned 47 acres of land? Nobody knew. He kept it to himself. Kevin crossed his arms. That's convenient. Claire felt something old and familiar tighten in her chest. The shrinking feeling, the one she'd spent 11 years learning so gradually, she didn't know it had a name until after the divorce. When its absence made her realize it had been there all along, the pull to make herself smaller so Kevin could feel bigger. She stood on the porch and let the feeling come. She let it tighten, and then she let it pass through her like a wave. And when it was gone, she was still standing in the same place, and Kevin was still looking at her, and she hadn't moved an inch. My father bought this land in 1989. She said he died 8 months after our divorce was finalized. His estate was never part of our marriage. The deed is in his name. It was always in his name. There is nothing to disclose because there was nothing to disclose. My mother thinks we should talk to a lawyer about this. Your mother is welcome to talk to any lawyer she wants. Kevin's face shifted. The reasonable mask slipped for a moment, and what was underneath was not anger. Exactly. It was frustration. Kevin didn't like being on the outside of information. For 11 years, he'd known everything about Claire's life. Every bank balance, every schedule, every plan. The idea that her father had something he didn't know about was not a legal problem for Kevin. It was a control problem. I'm trying to be civil about this, he said. You drove 2 hours without telling me to look at property that belongs to me. That's not civil, Kevin. That's what you've always done. The words came out before she planned them. She watched them land. Kevin's jaw tightened. He stood there for a moment. Then he put his hands back in his pockets and walked to his car without saying anything else. He got in, turned the engine over, and backed down the dirt track through the oaks. Claire stood on the porch until the sound of his car faded. Her hands were steady. Her breath was even. Lady came trotting back from the orchard with Lily behind her. And Lily looked at the empty space where Kevin's car had been. Dad left. He left. Is he mad? Claire sat down on the porch steps. Lily sat beside her. Lady laid down at their feet. He's not happy, Claire said. But that's not your problem, and it's not mine either. Michael came by the next Saturday. Claire told him what happened. He listened, nodded, sipped his coffee. He'll try something legal, Michael said. They always do. I know. You need a lawyer. I'll find one. There's a woman in town. Does property and family work. Name's on the sign by the post office. She's good. Claire found the lawyer the next Monday. She was a straightforward woman with a small office above a hardware store who listened to the whole story, reviewed the deed and the probate documents, and gave Claire a clear answer in under 15 minutes. This is separate property, she said. Your father acquired it decades before your marriage, and it was never commingled with marital assets. He didn't live there. Your name was never on it, and it passed to you through his estate after the divorce was finalized. Kevin has no claim, none. Can he drag it out? He can file motions. A judge would dismiss them. If his attorney is competent, they'll tell him the same thing I'm telling you. Claire paid the consultation fee and drove home with the lawyer's assessment letter in an envelope on the passenger seat. She felt lighter than she had in days. But Kevin's mother came 2 weekends later. Claire was in the garden turning soil for a second row of tomatoes. Lily and Lady were in the orchard. Michael was on his porch up the road. A car Claire didn't recognize pulled through the gate and stopped in the yard. A woman got out. Mid-60s, dressed for a suburb, not a farm. White blouse, pressed slacks, sunglasses pushed up on her head. Kevin's mother, Claire, had spent 11 years sitting across from this woman at holiday dinners. She knew the posture, the way she scanned a room before entering it. Claire, hello. Kevin's mother looked at the house, the garden, the orchard. Her expression was controlled, polite, but underneath it was the same calculation Claire had seen in Kevin's face 2 weeks earlier. Kevin tells me Thomas left you this place, and you're refusing to have a conversation about it. There's no conversation to have. My lawyer has sent Kevin a letter explaining the property's legal status. It's a separate estate. It's mine. Kevin's mother walked a few steps toward the house. She looked at the porch, the shutters Claire had painted, the railing Thomas had sanded. She looked at it the way someone looks at something they've already decided isn't worth their time. Thomas was a janitor. She said he mowed lawns for a living. I find it difficult to believe he built anything worth fighting over. Claire heard the front door open. Michael was standing on the porch. She hadn't heard his truck, but he must have seen the unfamiliar car from his place and walked down. He had his cap in his hand, and his expression was quiet and still. Ma'am, he said, I don't think we've met. Kevin's mother looked at him. And you are? Michael. I live up the road. I've been Thomas's neighbor for close to 40 years. I see. Michael stepped off the porch. He was a tall man, even at 78, and he moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Thomas Jackson was a groundskeeper, he said. That's true. And on weeknights, he went home to an apartment that didn't have much in it. But every weekend for 30 years, that man drove 2 hours to this property, and he built this house with his own hands. He planted every tree in that orchard. He poured the foundation, framed the walls, hung the doors, ran the water line from the spring. He did it alone mostly. I helped sometimes, but mostly he did it alone. He looked at Kevin's mother steadily. He left his daughter a life, not a fortune, a life. And if your son or you or anybody else thinks they're going to take that away from her, you'd better bring more than an opinion about janitors. Kevin's mother looked at Michael. She looked at Claire. She looked at the farm one more time. Then she got back in her car and drove away without saying another word. Michael put his cap back on. I'll be on my porch if you need me, he said and walked back up the road. Claire stood in the garden and watched him go. Lady had come back from the orchard and was sitting near the porch, her ears tracking the departing car. Lily was behind her. Who was that? Lily asked. Nobody important, Claire said. The lawyer's letter did its work. Kevin called a week later. His voice was different, smaller. My attorney says there's no claim, he said. I know. I wasn't trying to take it from you. Claire didn't answer that because they both knew it wasn't true. I just wanted to understand, he said. Now you do. He hung up. Claire set the phone down on the kitchen table, Thomas's table, and looked out the window at the orchard and felt something close. A door she'd been holding open for years. A door she'd kept cracked in case Kevin decided to be the person she'd married instead of the person he'd become. She let it close quietly without ceremony the way Thomas would have done it. That night, she found letter number 5. She was cleaning behind the bookshelf in the bedroom when she felt the envelope taped to the back panel. She peeled it off and sat on the bed and opened it. It was the longest letter yet. 2 full pages, both sides. Thomas's handwriting getting smaller toward the bottom of each page to fit everything in. Claire, this is the letter I've been putting off. I bought this land the year after you were born. Your mother was already unhappy and I didn't know how to fix it. I couldn't fix her and I couldn't fix myself. And the only thing I knew was how to build. So, I bought 47 acres with money I'd saved from before the service. And I drove out here every weekend and I started. I told myself it was for the family, A place we'd go together someday. But your mother left and it was just you and me and I kept building anyway. I told myself it was for you for someday. Then you married Kevin. I sat in the back row at the reception and I watched him. His hand was on your elbow, not guiding, steering. I knew that grip because I'd felt it. Different person, different direction, same pressure. I went home that night and I looked at this place and someday became soon. I finished the house that fall. I planted 20 trees. I stocked the root cellar for the first time. I tried to say something to you. I rehearsed it driving home on Sunday nights. I had whole speeches worked out. But Monday morning, I'd call you and I'd hear your voice. And you sounded like you were trying so hard to make it work. And I'd lose my nerve. Every time I couldn't fight what was happening to you. I couldn't find the words, but I could keep building and I could make sure you had somewhere to land. That's what this place is. Not a farm, not a project. It's the only thing I had instead of the words I couldn't say. I see you, Claire. I always saw you. I wasn't going to let you fall. Even if you had to fall first before you found this place. I love you. I should have said it every day, Dad. Claire sat on the bed in the room Thomas had built with the window he positioned to face the orchard, and she held the letter in both hands, and she cried for the first time since she was 11 years old, and watched her mother drive away. She cried for Thomas, for the man she thought was empty and silent and absent, who had spent 3 decades building the answer to a question she hadn't known to ask. She cried for all the Sundays she'd been too busy or too tired or too wrapped up in Kevin's world to call. For the birthday, she'd sent a card instead of driving over. For the last time, she'd visited him at the VA when he'd been thin and quiet in the hospital bed, and she'd sat in the chair beside him, and they'd watched television together, and neither of them had said anything that mattered. She cried until she was done, and then she wiped her face and folded the letter, and put it with the others in the nightstand drawer, and walked outside. Lady was on the porch. The orchard was dark against the last light. She sat down on the bench, the one Thomas had labeled porch bench seats too, and Lady put her head on her foot, and she decided she was done with the apartment, done with the 2-column list on the fridge, done with the life that was built around surviving and nothing else. She called Ruth the next morning. I'm putting in my notice, she said. The farm? The farm. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. It's about time. Claire told Kevin the following Sunday at the custody exchange. She kept it factual. She was moving to the farm. She'd be enrolling Lily in the school district there. She'd like to discuss adjusting the custody schedule. Kevin stood in his doorway and looked at her. You're serious? He said. I'm serious. He was quiet. She could see him running through responses, measuring each one, discarding the ones that wouldn't work. Finally, he said, Fine, we'll work it out. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd expected. The apartment took 2 hours to pack. Claire was amazed by how little she had. The pull-out couch was rented. The dishes were from a thrift store. Her clothes fit in 3 bags. The list on the fridge, the 2-column one. She peeled it off and folded it and put it in the trash. She loaded the rented truck on a Saturday morning in early June. Lily carried her backpack to the cab and climbed up onto the seat and buckled her belt. Lady was at the farm waiting. Michael had promised to be there when they arrived. Claire closed the back of the truck. She looked up at the apartment above the laundromat. The window was dark. The building was vibrating from the machines below. She'd lived there for 8 months. She'd slept on a mattress on the floor. She'd counted every dollar, skipped meals, worked double shifts, and kept the list on the fridge because looking at the numbers was better than guessing. Ready? Lily asked from the cab. Claire turned away from the building. She got in the truck and started the engine. Ready? They drove south. 3 months later, the orchard was heavy with fruit. Claire walked the rows every morning before Lily's school bus came. It had become her routine. Coffee on the porch while the light was still thin. Then a walk through the trees with Lady beside her, checking the branches, looking for windfalls, noting which trees were ready and which needed another week. The winesap apples were always first. Deep red, firm, with a tartness that made her mouth water. The Arkansas blacks came later, dark and dense, and the Rome beauty after that, green, gold, and sweet. Thomas had planted these trees over 3 decades. The oldest ones had trunks as thick as fence posts. The youngest were still slender, their branches just starting to bend under the weight of their first real crop. Claire knew them all now. She knew which ones had been grafted, and which ones grew from rootstock. She knew which row caught the most morning sun, and which corner of the orchard stayed wet after rain. She knew the farm. The house was different now. The shelves Thomas had built were full. Books, jars of honey, a vase Lily had made at school, a framed photo of Thomas from the VA that the nurse Patrice had mailed after Claire sent a thank you card. The kitchen table had 4 chairs around it instead of 1. Claire had built 2 of them herself in the workshop, following the joinery marks Thomas had left on the workbench. They weren't as clean as his. The joints were a little rough, the legs a 1/4 inch uneven, but they held. Lily's bedroom was covered in drawings. Trees, bees, lady in 7 different poses. A picture of the root cellar with jars lined up on the shelves, each one labeled in Lily's careful printing. A picture of a man standing in an orchard with a hammer in his hand. She'd drawn a halo over his head, small and crooked. "That's Grandpa," she told Claire one morning. "He's watching the farm. It's a good drawing. I made his halo small because you said he was quiet. I figured his halo would be quiet too." Lady slept on the porch most nights. She was fully theirs now. She followed Claire through the orchard in the mornings and lay in the shade of the workshop while she worked and met Lily at the bus stop every afternoon, her tail swinging wide when the yellow door opened. She was not the wary half-feral animal they'd first seen from the car. She was a dog who had found her people. Saturday mornings, Michael came for coffee. It had started without anyone naming it. The second Saturday after Claire moved in, Michael walked down from his place at 8 o'clock and stood on the porch and said, "Thomas and I used to have coffee about now." Claire poured him a cup. He sat in the other chair, and they looked at the orchard and didn't say much. That was 3 months ago, and he hadn't missed a Saturday since. Claire learned things about Thomas from these Saturday mornings that the letters hadn't covered. Small things. Thomas liked his coffee black, but would drink it with cream if someone offered. He hummed when he worked, but stopped if he noticed anyone listening. He once carried a ladder 2 miles on his shoulder because the truck wouldn't start, and he needed to reach a branch that was rubbing the roof. Did he ever talk about the letters? Claire asked one morning. The ones he hid around the place. You knew about those? I knew he was writing something. He'd sit on this porch Sunday evenings with a pencil and a sheet of paper, and work on whatever it was for an hour. He'd fold it up and walk off somewhere with it, and come back without it. I figured he was writing to someone. Michael sipped his coffee. Turns out he was writing to you and just putting the mailbox in a different place each time. Claire smiled. It was a Thomas thing to do. Too private for an envelope and a stamp. He'd rather hide the letter inside a nightstand drawer, and trust that she'd find it when she needed to. She found the last letter in September. She was checking the wine saps, reaching up to test the firmness of a cluster near the top of one of the older trees. Her hand brushed a knot in the trunk, a natural hollow about the size of a fist, and she felt something inside, plastic. She pulled it out, a small Ziploc bag, and inside the bag, an envelope, the number 7 on the front. Claire sat down at the base of the tree. Lady lay beside her. She opened the envelope. "Claire, you found them all. That means you know every corner of this place. Good. It belongs to you now, and it knows you belong to it. I don't have instructions this time. You don't need them anymore. I want to tell you something I should have said in person. I love you, Claire. I always did. I loved you when you were a baby and I held you and couldn't believe something that small could be that important. I loved you when your mother left and you stood at that window and didn't make a sound. I loved you every Sunday night when I drove home from this farm, tired and sore, knowing that everything I'd built that weekend was one more piece of a place you'd never have to earn or explain or defend. I loved you. And I didn't say it enough. I didn't say it ever. Really, not the way it needed to be said. I hope the trees say it for me. They'll be here longer than words. Every fall when the apples come in, that's me telling you. Every spring when the blossoms open, that's me telling you again. This isn't my farm anymore. It's yours. Take care of the bees. Keep the root cellar stocked. Oil the planes twice a year. Linseed not tongue. And be happy, Claire. You've earned it. Love, Dad. Claire sat under the apple tree with the letter in her lap. Lady pressed her nose against her hand. Above her, the branches were full and bowed with fruit, and the September light came through the leaves in pieces. She folded the letter and held it against her chest and sat there for a long time. She wasn't crying. She was just still in a way she hadn't been in years, maybe ever. Something had settled all the way down to the bottom, to the place where the grief and the anger and the questions lived, and it was quiet there now. She put the letter in her pocket and stood and walked back to the house. By October, Claire was selling apples and honey at the Saturday market in town. She set up a folding table between a woman who sold beeswax candles and a man with heirloom tomatoes. Her jars of honey had handwritten labels. Jackson Farm. The apples she sorted into paper bags by variety. She sold out her first Saturday by noon. The second week, she brought twice as much and sold out by 2. The honey sold fastest. People kept coming back for it. Your bees make good honey, the candle woman said. My father's bees, Claire said. I'm just the new management. The market brought people to the farm. A woman named Sandy asked if she could see the orchard. Claire said yes. And then 2 more asked. And by the end of October, she was giving informal tours on Saturday afternoons. People wanted to see the trees Thomas had planted. They wanted to hear about the man who built a farm in secret for 3 decades. Claire told the story simply without embellishment. People listened and shook their heads and bought more honey. In November, she started the workshops. It began with a conversation at the market. A young woman, maybe 20, with a toddler on her hip and circles under her eyes. She bought a jar of honey and a bag of apples, and then stood at Claire's table for a moment like she wanted to say something. I heard you live out here alone, the woman said. With your daughter? Ido. How do you do it? I mean the house, the land. I don't know how to fix anything. My husband left and the kitchen faucet leaks and I can't afford a plumber, and I don't know where to start. Claire looked at her. She saw something she recognized. The same expression she'd worn in the apartment above the laundromat. Not despair, something worse. The feeling that the list of things you don't know how to do is longer than the list of things you do. Come out to the farm next Saturday, Claire said. I'll show you. The woman came. She brought a friend. Claire showed them how to tighten a faucet, how to replace a washer, how to check if a pipe joint was leaking, and how to wrap it with tape if it was. Basic things. Things Thomas had done without thinking. Things Claire hadn't known she knew until she stood in his workshop and picked up his tools and found that her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The next week, 4 women came. Claire taught them how to can tomatoes. Michael showed up with a box of mason jars and sat on the porch and watched and didn't say anything, but Claire caught him smiling. By December, there were 8 women coming most Saturdays. Claire called it a workshop, but it was really just a morning on the farm where people learned things they needed to know. How to sharpen a knife, how to patch drywall, how to start a garden from seed, how to read a property deed. One of the women, the first one from the market, asked Claire a question that stayed with her. How did you find this place? My father left it to me. It's really yours? Like all of it? Nobody can come and take it? Claire looked at her. It's mine. Home isn't where they let you stay. It's where nobody can make you leave. Kevin drove Lily down on a Friday evening in November. He'd adjusted the custody schedule without much argument. Claire got Lily on Thursdays through Sundays. Now Kevin had her Monday through Wednesday. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And Lily was happier than Claire had seen her since before the divorce. Kevin got out of the car and stood in the yard. He looked different than he had the last time he was here, less rigid. Lily ran to Claire, and then ran to the orchard because she wanted to check on a bird's nest she'd found the weekend before. Kevin watched her go. He was holding Lily's overnight bag and a manila folder. She talks about this place constantly, he said. She loves it here. Kevin looked at the house, at the porch, the green shutters, the workshop at the orchard stretching out behind it all. I brought her school drawings, he said. He held out the folder. Her teacher wanted you to see them. Claire opened the folder. Inside were 5 drawings and colored pencil. The orchard in fall colors, lady sleeping on the porch, the root cellar with its shelves of jars, the workshop from the inside with tools on the wall and furniture on the floor. And the last one, a man standing among apple trees, a hammer in one hand, a letter in the other, a small, quiet halo above his head. Claire looked at the drawings for a long time. Kevin shifted his weight. She seems happy, he said. Claire looked up at him. Whatever he'd been when they were married, whatever he tried to do with the legal threats and the questions and the long silences designed to make her doubt herself, he was standing in the yard of her father's farm telling her that their daughter was happy. That was something. It might not have been enough, but it was something. She is, Claire said. She really is happy. Kevin nodded. He got in his car. He drove back down the gravel road through the oaks. Claire watched him go and felt nothing. Not anger, not relief, not sadness, just the neutral quiet of a chapter that had ended. Saturday morning, December, first frost on the grass. Michael sat on the porch with his coffee and his cap pulled low against the cold. Lady lay between their chairs. Lily was inside drawing at the kitchen table. I want to tell you something, Michael said. Go ahead. The day Thomas first came to see this property. I remember it. 1989 fall. I was out fixing my fence line and I saw a truck pull off the road and a young man get out. He was maybe 35, 36, flannel shirt, work boots. He walked through the gate and up the track, and he stood right about where your car is parked now. Claire looked at the spot. He didn't move. Michael said, 10 minutes he stood there. Didn't walk around. Didn't poke at anything. Just stood still and looked at the trees, the hills, the field like he was listening to something nobody else could hear. What did he say? He said 2 words. This is it. Then he got back in his truck and left. Next weekend he was back with a shovel and a bag of seedlings. And he came back every weekend after that for the rest of his life. Claire looked at the orchard. The trees were bare now, the leaves gone, the branches dark against the winter sky. But she could see the shape of what Thomas had built, the rows, the spacing, the way each tree had room to grow. She could see the plan. 30 years of weekends. 30 years of driving and digging and planting and building. And it all started with a man standing in a field and saying, "This is it." "Thank you, Michael," she said. "For what? For being his friend? For being here." Michael sipped his coffee. He was easy to be friends with. You just had to pay attention. That evening, Lily was in bed, and the house was quiet. Claire sat on the porch in the cold with a blanket around her shoulders and Thomas's Bible in her lap. Lady was at her feet, her breath fogging in the air. The orchard was silver in the moonlight, the bare branches holding their shape against the sky. She opened the Bible to the place where the deed had been hidden. The torn binding, the cut thread, the gap in the leather where a folded piece of paper had waited for her. She ran her fingers over the rough edge where she'd cut the stitching that night on the floor of the apartment. With the laundromat quiet below, and the world feeling very small, the world didn't feel small anymore. She closed the Bible and set it on the railing beside her coffee. Lady shifted, pressing her weight against her ankle. The only sound was the wind moving through the bare branches of the orchard, steady and low, and she sat and listened to it the way you listen to someone who has finally said everything they needed to say.